All right. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to invest in your professional development and invest in learning new strategies for helping introverted students. I am so excited to share this topic with you. This is a real passion of mine and something that I really enjoy learning about myself and teaching others about. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll jump in. All right, is my PowerPoint up? Can someone give me a thumbs up? All right, perfect, thank you. All right, so I am Dr. Tiffany Rao from the Department of Special Education in the College of Education at Cal State Fullerton, and I am thrilled to be presenting a series of webinars this month, and they are sponsored by Schools First Federal Credit Union and the Center for Creativity and Critical Thinking here at Cal State Fullerton. And so today I'm going to be talking about teaching practices that help introverted students thrive. So let's jump right in and get into it. I'm going to start with a quote, and this quote is by Susan Cain, who is right now probably the biggest name in introverted literature about introversion. And she says, thriving at school or anywhere else comes more naturally when you're in an environment that allows your nervous system to function at its best. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you today are really simple, no prep, low prep strategies that you can use tomorrow or in the fall, whether you're on break already or not, to create an environment that will allow all students to function at their best because it's going to fit with their nervous system. This quote, by the way, I want to share with you is from this book. If you can see my little square of picture, it is by Susan Cain, and it's called Quiet Power: The Secret Strengths of Introverted Kids. I love this book. My daughter's an introvert, I'm an introvert, and we listen to this together on audiobook. So if you're the parent of an introverted child who maybe, doesn't understand themselves or feels like there's something wrong with them, I highly, highly recommend either the hard copy of this book. I wanted to get a hard copy as well because there's a test in here and there's a lot of just good information that I like to refer back to. As you can see, mine's very well loved with highlights and dog ears and all of that. But the audiobook is really convenient too. Just listen to it when you're in the car. So it's a great way to help your introverted child understand themselves better and recognize that there's so many strengths about the way that they are, and then help them feel more empowered. So a little more about Susan Cain before I really get into it, because I want to give her due credit. I've used so much of her literature in preparing this presentation. She first wrote, she's kind of credited with galvanizing this revolution for introverts and helping to empower so many introverts in a society that really misunderstands and undervalues introverts. Her first book was Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. She wrote that in 2012, and that's more for adults. And then she's done a couple of TED Talks that are really great if you're interested in learning more. And then she wrote this book for kids in 2016. And last year she released a journal related to her books. So she has a lot of great information, and I have pulled heavily from it. So I want to make sure I give her credit. So here's what we are going to cover. I'm going to first open up with the science of introversion and extroversion and really get into the differences in our brains. It is not simply being shy. It's not just a preference that introverts need to try harder to be more social. There really are brain differences and that are present at birth through our DNA that make us more leaned towards introversion versus extroversion. So I'm going to get into that. And then I'll talk about introverts in the classroom and some things that are important to know about introverts in the classroom. And then I'm going to give you like 20 strategies or something. I've got a whole bunch of strategies. Like I said, they're quick. They're low prep, no prep. They're not necessarily quick things that you do, but they're just kind of ways of sometimes tweaking class discussions to encourage engagement from all students rather than just the talkative students, things like that. So I might ask you to use the Zoom reaction buttons to reply to certain things. So if you know how to do that, that's great. It should be on the bottom of your screen. It says reactions and there's like a thumbs up and things like that. I may or may not use that, but I'm just giving you a heads up. If you have any questions, you can ask anytime in the chat. And during Q&A, I've got 3 Q&As ready. So 2 spread out during the presentation and then 1 more at the end. So I will look in the chat when I get to the questions part, and then, or you can just speak up. You don't have to raise your hand. Just when it's the Q&A part, you can just unmute yourself and ask a question. We'll also use the chat box sometimes maybe for responses. Please do remain muted unless it's the Q&A time and you want to ask a question. And I will be sharing some links and documents in the chat that you might look at while we're together. But if you're on a phone or you just aren't really able to open links or documents, that's okay. You can still just listen in on the webinar and then you can email me and I'm happy to send you any documents and links that I've shared with you via email. And you can just reply to the email that I sent out with the Zoom link. Okay, so let's get into it. All right, the first thing we're going to do is a poll EV. If you've ever done this before, it's really fun. It's called Poll Everywhere. And there are 2 ways to participate in this. You can text, you're gonna text in the phone number box on your text. I think I sound really old saying that, but where you would type in a phone number or a contact, put 22333. And then in the conversation text box, put all one word, Tiffany Rao 778. And I've done this many times in other people's presentations. I've never gotten weird. I've never been put on a list. They don't contact you. So it is safe. Or you can go to this link. And you know what? I'll just put this in the, let me put this in the chat box. I'm going to click out of there. And then if you'd prefer, you can just click on the link. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to, hold on, can't do 2 things at once. There you go. There is the link. I want you to tell me, what are some things you've heard about quiet people? I'm kind of thinking in terms of stereotypes, but you can just share anything. So what are some things that you have perhaps heard about quiet people or about introverted people, or even some things that you've maybe thought before? If you're more extroverted, there's no judgment. It will not show your name on here, by the way. This is all anonymous. So go ahead, go there, type in 1 word at a time. If you type in a sentence, it's going to divide it up into all the different words of your sentence, and then it doesn't really work. So go there, type in 1 word, and I will open it up in a moment when you've had time, and we will look at it. So I'll give you some time. Okay, let me share my screen now. And full screen. Okay. All right, here we go. And you can put in more, you can put in multiple words, just make them separate entries. I don't know, maybe you don't have to make them separate entries, but I did when I've done it before. So you can continue adding words if you'd like to, but I'll go ahead and start. Oh, screen sharing is paused. Hold on, why did it do that? You guys didn't get to see that. Where is it? Okay. There we go. Can you see this? Can people see this? Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so here are some of the words that y'all are putting in. Snobby, antisocial, boring. Oh, the bigger the word means the more people have said that word. So boring is really big and shy is really big. So those are words that multiples of you are putting in. Too quiet. I like how you put that into one word so that it would show up. Creepy, neurotic, judgmental, rude, slow response process. Oh, that's a good one. Unconfident, uninterested, weird, or sociopaths. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm going to go ahead and close that now. Oh, somebody else just added one. What was it? Let me see if I can find it. Oh, I'm not sure, but those are great responses. So thank you for sharing. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. Here we go. All right. So a couple of illustrations that I like that kind of also illustrate the stereotypes about introverts. This says what people, these are by Anne Borges, what people think introverted means: socially awkward, hates people, shy, book nerd, too serious, or people who don't have the skills to be extroverts. And what introverted actually means is a broad term referring to a diverse group of people who are energized by alone time. It is more complicated than that, but that's a pretty good way to sum it up. A lot of people assume that introverts are basically just shy people who just need to try harder to interact. And that is not the case. And then here, this is another funny one. Money you'd pay to never hear these questions again. Are you shy? Are you okay? Why are you so quiet? Do you hate people or something? I could definitely relate to that one. I've heard some of those throughout my life as well. All right, so let's get into the brain differences. This is so interesting to me. So I'm going to go over three things that, three brain differences. Introverts and extroverts' brains differ in the following ways: neurotransmitter differences, brain pathway length, and gray matter. Let's start with neurotransmitter differences. So a very brief, simplified definition of neurotransmitters is that they are chemicals that send messages between your brain and your body. Most humans have mostly roughly the same 60 plus neurotransmitters in their brains, but each person has their own slightly different recipe that is determined by our DNA and present at birth. And our recipes, our individual recipes, account for many personality traits like introversion and extroversion. But our genes do allow for some flexibility, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, I'm going to give you an analogy. So introverts and extroverts develop different set points like a thermostat setting. So let's say, let me use this thermostat analogy. Let's say that you set your thermostat between like 68 and 74 degrees. And within that range, you're comfortable. No climate control is necessary. But if it gets out of that range, then the heater or the AC kicks on and you have to spend energy to make yourself comfortable again. The brain works in a very similar way in terms of introversion and extroversion. As an introvert, you might like a lot of social time one day and then some alone time the next day so that you can stay within that range. As long as you're within your set points, you're okay. But if a situation takes you beyond your upper set point. Maybe for a child, it's going to a big noisy birthday party, or for an adult, it's going to, a wedding followed by a 4-hour reception and talking to people constantly. I'm an introvert. I love weddings, but I will be very drained. I'll need to have a lot of alone time the next day. And just like a child at a noisy birthday party, they might not actually enjoy themselves because it's so overwhelming to them. Or they might have fun, but they're just exhausted when they get home or kind of cranky. So these set points, it means that two introverts with the same genetic disposition could come across quite differently. One might prefer to stay closer to like the higher end of their set points, while the other child stays cautiously at the low end. And how that happens is if a child gets enough positive experiences with social time while they're young, then they might enjoy kind of pushing towards the top of their range because they've had those positive experiences. And then maybe, their parents have kind of intuitively allowed them to relax afterwards, or they know that they need to recharge. So they can handle those social experiences, and they've been positive and they enjoy that. But if a child has a lot of negative social experiences, or they are pushed to be social, and their families don't really understand that they need some downtime or that it's overstimulating for them. And so then the experiences become negative. They might stay cautiously at the lower end of their set points and be a little more reclusive and a little quieter even. So that's how there is some flexibility. We can, with some positive, supportive experiences, stretch ourselves to be a little more extroverted, even as an introvert, or so to speak, or a more social introvert. Or it can go the other direction and we can become more introverted through those negative experiences. And similarly, an extrovert might, if they grow up in a family that's a little quieter, they might grow to appreciate some quieter activities while also still being really social. All right. Okay. So more on neurotransmitters. The two that I'm going to talk about are dopamine and acetylcholine. This is where the differences are, okay? The last slide was just an introduction. I'm barely getting started, you guys. So dopamine is a reward chemical. I want you to think of it as the extrovert's choice of neurotransmitters. It is a reward chemical. It causes a person to feel pleasure or euphoria. External stimulation like socializing, taking risks, doing new novel activities produces dopamine. And extroverts especially thrive on dopamine. Extroverts are less sensitive to dopamine, so they need more of it to experience pleasure than introverts. So their dopamine system is more active in their brains. Introverts, on the other hand, are more sensitive to dopamine. And so too much can make them feel overstimulated. So let me give an example of that. The example that I was thinking of earlier today is Benadryl. Okay, Benadryl. I am not sensitive to Benadryl. I can take like 1 or 2 if I'm having allergies one day and then go to bed because it'll make me sleepy, but it doesn't make me feel weird. But some people are very sensitive to Benadryl, and they only need half a Benadryl, and that takes care of it. And then they don't feel doped up or drugged or anything like that. But if they take the full 1 to 2 adult serving, whatever dosage, then they're going to feel really yucky and not like the feeling at all. So dopamine is kind of like that. For extroverts, they almost can't get enough of it. Introverts need a very small amount of dopamine, and so they just need a small amount of socializing to feel good. But then if it goes on too longer, it no longer feels good to them. Now let's talk about acetylcholine, and this is the introvert's choice of neurotransmitters. It is also a reward chemical. It causes feelings of relaxation, alertness, and contentment. and it helps a person focus on one task for a long time. This chemical is produced in a calm environment, and introverts thrive on acetylcholine. It feels very good to introverts, while extroverts don't really feel the effects of acetylcholine very much. So that explains a lot in terms of why extroverts find introvert activities kind of boring. It is literally boring in their brains. It produces going to a library, right? Introverts sometimes like to go to a library or to a museum or, a pretty park or something like that and just have quiet time and love it. And an extrovert might be like, that's so boring. I want to go to a party. I want to go to, a bonfire at the beach and do all these super social things because that is what produces dopamine. Whereas some of those after a while will be too much for an introvert and they would prefer the acetylcholine. And here is just an illustration about that. So here's an extrovert asking for more dopamine, and the introvert is like, enough. She's had just a little bit, and that is enough because it makes them feel overstimulated. So along the lines of neurotransmitters is brain pathway length. This is so interesting to me. So an introvert actually has a longer pathway. The acetylcholine pathway that it follows is longer than the dopamine pathway, okay? So introverts thrive on acetylcholine and it's getting produced, and the acetylcholine is going through the parts of the brains responsible for empathy and new ideas and really personal reflection, memories from the past. How does that fit into the present? All these deep thoughts and self-reflection. And it's a longer pathway. Extroverts who prefer dopamine, the dopamine pathway is shorter, and it's just more like taste, touch, sight, sound. It's shorter and it's simpler. So this actually makes socializing easier rather than, oh gosh, I'm socializing, I'm taking everything in that people are saying, it's bringing up all these old memories, I'm having all these deep thoughts, what do I share? Versus extroverts don't think about it that much. They tend to think out loud. Introverts are going through all of this and deciding what to say. So yeah, we can be a little awkward sometimes because it's really hard to be social and try to play it cool and know what to do with our hands with all these cool extroverts. And we've got all this stuff going on in our head, and it's hard to decide what to say out of all these different ideas that we have inside. So give your introvert friends a break for being a little bit awkward at parties. It is our brains. We can't help it. And then the last brain difference is gray matter. Gray matter basically is a type of tissue that makes up the brain. It is a major component of the central nervous system. It's associated with abstract thought, decision-making, and social behavior. And introverts specifically have more gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, and it's thicker. So we literally have more stuff that our thoughts are moving through. It is thicker and we have more of it. And therefore, introverts have to devote more resources to abstract thinking, while extroverts tend to live in the moment. And then one more example from science. So this is about stimulation. And introverts are more sensitive to all kinds of stimulation, not just social time. So in a study by Hans Eysenck, participants were given lemon juice. I don't know how much lemon juice, but lemon juice was given to them on their tongue, or they drank it or whatever. And then saliva levels were measured. And the introverts consistently produced more saliva in response to the lemon juice stimulus than extroverts. And this plays out in terms of, imagine an extrovert loving to go to like a dance club where there's a crowd and there's sometimes flashing lights, loud music, and just a lot going on, right? They're thriving on that. And that's so exciting. That is totally overstimulating for a lot of introverts. I used to go out dancing in college with my friends, and I had a great time at some of these kinds of clubs. But the next day, I was so tired. I had an introvert hangover, which is a real thing, and I'll talk more about later, and would just have to like do nothing for a day or two just to get over it. Okay, so I'm going to show you now a brief 1.5-minute video that I think is a really nice review for everything that we have just talked about. So let me just hold on, and I'm going to start the video and then share my screen. Okay. All right. Let me make sure also that I've got I have my sound ready for you. Okay. All right. If you, when I play this, if you guys can't hear this, will somebody just speak up and let me know, okay?
What is an introvert? Introversion and extroversion are two of the most fundamental personality traits. It's often said that introverts get their energy from being alone, and extroverts get energy from socializing. But actually, that's not really true. The truth is that both introverts and extroverts can enjoy social time, and both will eventually get tired. But extroverts are more like marathon runners, and introverts are more like sprinters. The difference comes down to our brains. Research suggests that extroverts have a more active dopamine reward system. Dopamine is the feel-good brain chemical. It helps extroverts power through the fatigue of a busy social setting so that they may not even notice they're getting tired, unlike introverts. It's like two people are working out at the gym, except one of them gets an energy drink. Instead, many introverts feel rewarded by digging deeper. They turn to things like books, creative time, quiet introspection, or one-on-one discussion with a friend. For an introvert, these quiet activities are often more fun than a loud party. If you're an introvert, you know that all that quiet time pays off. But society doesn't always see that. Instead, it tends to reward those who are vocal, outgoing, and socially connected. What would happen if we valued the contributions of both extroverts and introverts? What if deep thinking was just as important as speaking up? If people truly understood introverts, society would be better for us all.
Okay. All right. So let's go back to here. All right, any questions so far? It's okay if there are not, but I want to give you the opportunity if you do have any questions. All right, okay, moving on then. So now you can go ahead and take the test. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? You might already know, but let me just click out of there. I'm going to share the website with you that you can take the test. Put it in the chat. Okay, so I'm also going to put in the chat this as a document. Just find it. So you can go ahead and start taking the test if you're ready. And then I'm going to ask you to share it on Poll EV again. Okay. So let me just find my documents. Okay. Here we go. I am posting this test as a Word document, but it is copied straight from the website. And then there's also one for kids that's copied straight from this book I shared with you earlier. So if you just want that, that is in there, downloading. And so now let me go activate my other poll. Okay. So now you can do the, go back to poll EV, the exact same one that I posted before, either on the website or you can text it and tell me if you're an extrovert, an introvert, or an ambivert if you're done with the quiz. And let's take a look. I'm gonna put mine in as well. Okay. Okay. Let's take a look. Here we go. Okay, so we have an ambivert and an introvert, and maybe no full-on extroverts. Interesting. We can say whatever we want about them if that's the case. Just kidding. Extroverts are great. Every introvert needs a good extroverted friend. Okay, so I'm going to guess that you know if you're an introvert or an extrovert. And I might not even give you enough time to finish, but that's okay. So here are the results. Oops, I have to share my PowerPoint again. Hold on. Okay, so if this is directly from the website called quietrev.com, that's Susan Cain's website, and that was the one that I shared with you to take the test. So if you answered mostly D's and E's, you are an introvert. Given the choice, you'll devote your social energy to a small group of people that you care about most, preferring maybe a glass of wine with a close friend to a party full of strangers. You think before you speak, you have a more deliberate approach to risk, and you enjoy solitude. You feel energized when focusing deeply on a subject or activity that really interests you. And when you're in an overly stimulating environment, like too loud or too crowded, you tend to feel overwhelmed. You seek out environments of peace, sanctuary, and beauty. You have an active inner life, and you're at your best when you tap into its riches. Introverts tend to enjoy quiet conversation, listen more than they talk, and focus on meaningful relationships and meaningful work. A little bit more on introvert traits. They do their best work alone. They feel most relaxed and calm in environments with minimal stimulation. They enjoy quiet activities, prefer a few close friendships over a large group of friends, often feel best in the comfort of home, spend a lot of time exploring their inner world, tend to think deeply about life and the world around them, seek out meaning in their life choices, can be overwhelmed by settings with a lot of interaction, like work or school, and can experience that introvert hangover that I talked about after too much stimulation. That is absolutely a real thing. And it happens when an introvert spends a lot of time with others and doesn't get enough time alone to recharge. And that person might feel irritable, exhausted, or have trouble focusing. Extroverts, if you answered mostly A's and B's, then you're an extrovert. You relish social life and are energized by interacting with friends and strangers alike. You're assertive, go-getting, and able to seize the day. You're great at thinking on your feet and relatively comfortable with conflict. Given the choice, you usually prefer more stimulating environments that give you frequent opportunities to see and speak with others. When you're in quiet environments, you're prone to feeling bored and restless. You're actively engaged in the world around you and at your best when you tap into its energy. So a few more traits: you feel energized when around others and in large groups, tend to be outgoing and high energy, do their best work when working with others, seek out new experiences, prefer a full schedule, being out and about, you make social connections easily and like lots of social interaction. You feel bored or sad when spending a lot of time alone, think through problems by talking them out with others, and usually adaptable and flexible to different situations. And then ambiverts. If you answered mostly C's, or you were like a near even mix across responses, then you're an ambivert. Now, I don't usually think one type of person is better than others, but ambiverts are clearly the best because they have the best of both worlds. It's a great place to be. You have all of the, positive extrovert, some of the positive extrovert traits and introvert. You can probably get along with anyone. So in many ways, like I said, have the best of both worlds, the strengths of each as needed. You can tap into whichever side you need at the time. And if you kind of saw yourself in both of the information on extroverts and introverts, then you're an ambivert. Now, of course, I'm an introvert, but I enjoy, I'm pretty adaptable and flexible to different situations. I can identify with some of these extrovert traits. Also, not all extroverts are outgoing. Some extroverts are a little shy in certain social situations. So it's not like a hard line that's drawn between extroverts and introverts. We all fall somewhere along the spectrum. Probably nobody is a full 100% extrovert or introvert. We all fall somewhere on the continuum with maybe, and some of us are a little more so this or that than others. So a few illustrations just to, that I think really speak louder than words in a lot of ways. Introverts tend to talk to themselves inside of our minds, and extroverts tend to think out loud. And here is kind of another way of thinking that, noticing like the inner world of introverts and extroverts kind of live more externally. And then here's a couple of roosters, and the extrovert is saying cock-a-doodle-doo, and then the introvert is typing it on their computer. And then I'm not going to read these, but this is the document that I posted in the chat. So the test for kids and teens is a little bit different. And I wasn't able to find this online. I got it straight from the book. It might be somewhere on her quietrev.com website, but I couldn't find it. But it's just a little more straightforward. It's about, I don't like being called on in class, a little more, teen and kid friendly, and it's just true or false. So they count up, if they had more truths or more falses, that tells them more truths is introvert. And if it's about even, then that's ambivert, and more falses, you'd be a little more extroverted. And it's a lot. There's more of them there as well. So why does this matter? It matters because introversion and extroversion lie at the heart of human nature. When we live in congruence with our temperament, we feel our best, we have more energy, and we are free to live our best life. But when we try to be someone we're not, like a lot of introverts feel they have to do, our energy, our creativity, and our potential for success are depleted. Making choices that match up with who we are deep down leads to greater life satisfaction because we are more likely to find a good career fit, find friends that fit us and get us, find hobbies that fulfill us, and find our passion and things that we're likely to do well. And so what's the problem? The problem is that in our culture, particularly Western American culture, we have this extrovert ideal. Susan Cain says that our culture is dominated by the omnipresent belief that the ideal self is gregarious, alpha, and comfortable in the spotlight. Our culture tends to value action over contemplation, style over substance, and it tends to view introversion somewhere between a disappointment and something pathological. And I think that showed really well in that first poll, with creepy, shy, boring, weird. I think sociopath was on there. And this extrovert ideal influences what we value, who we admire, how we behave, and what we look for in employees, and how we raise our children. The extrovert ideal is so everywhere, omnipresent, as Susan Cain said, that we don't really even realize it. We don't see it. But introverts feel it because they feel like there's something undesirable about them for fitting into society. The message is that extroversion is what's desirable and introversion is not. Research suggests, actually, before I get to that, this extrovert ideal, just a brief history about that started in the late 19th century with big business and urbanization, and then it was further emboldened by Hollywood movies a little bit later on. And if we're living in this extrovert ideal society, classroom, or household, extroverts thrive while introverts are trying to keep up. And back down to this last bullet point, research suggests that introverts may be at a higher risk for mental health issues like depression and anxiety. Now, some of this is due to the nature of introversion. For one thing, introverts can have a tendency toward perfectionism and sometimes have a tendency to get stuck in negative thinking. So that can certainly contribute to some mental health challenges. But also, if they feel, when others are always insisting to them that they need to join the crowd, pushing them out of their comfort zone to be more social, this is what you need, then people can end up feeling so miserable that they end up avoiding social interaction even more. They feel social discomfort and they're kind of forced into more of it than they want to be at. So that can lead to more isolation, and too much isolation can contribute to depression or anxiety. And when introverts isolate themselves, it can make it easier to protect their energy, but it can also make it harder to find healthy friendships with people who support and honor you and who you really are. And loneliness contributes to depression. And even introverts, everybody, we all need connections. And introverts can get lonely as well. And when messages from others imply that introversion is a negative trait, then introverts end up feeling or worrying that there's something wrong with them and that they need to change. So forcing yourself to have more frequent interactions and avoid proper self-care like breaks because it seems socially inappropriate can leave you feeling bad. And emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically, you might have some real issues and suffer in that way. The effort required to maintain a facade of extroversion can also contribute to anxiety and depression. So that's what the problem is. That's really why we've got to do more and make some small changes that can make a big difference for our introverts so that they can grow up reaching their potential, feeling good about who they are, and having good mental health. Now, aren't introverts just shy? I want to make this distinction. Shyness is more about fear. fear of embarrassment often, or social judgment. In a young child, shyness can be really just a healthy caution about strangers. And you know what? I'm fine with that. I am fine with seeing young children be shy around strangers because I think they somewhere innately know they trust their parents and they should be a little cautious around people that they don't know. Fine. But as we get older, if we're still shy, then it's really more about a little bit of fear of social judgment. I'm not a particularly shy person. I certainly not in every situation. Sometimes if I'm in one of those situations where I'm in a group and I only know like one person there and everybody else seems to know each other really well, I'll feel kind of shy and awkward in that kind of a situation because it's like, what do I do with my hands? What do I do? But otherwise, I can get up and lecture and teach and I like to sing karaoke, and people might think that's not something that introverts like to do, but it's one of my favorite things. So not all introverts are shy, but some extroverts are shy. So shyness is not the same as introversion. An extrovert can feel shy even though they want that social interaction, and an introvert may or may not be shy. Introverts might be a little more prone to shyness because they've had some awkward social interactions, and that does lead to a little bit more judgment. So then they might internalize that and have a little bit of shyness. So there might be more of inclination to shyness there. And then of course there's social anxiety, which is more than just being a little shy. Social anxiety can cause a person to isolate, and this can happen to extroverts as well as introverts. So remember, it's about brain differences and not about being shy. So now I'm going to get into some things to know about introverts in the classroom, and then I will share some strategies. I'm going to go over 8 things to know about introverts in the classroom. Number 1, they have so much going on in their heads, it's hard for them to decide what to share. And I included this quote from Stephen Hawking: "Quiet people have the loudest minds." This illustration is from Introvert Spring, and I think it does just a great job of explaining this, what I think versus what I say. So all these thoughts going on in an introvert's head, and it's really hard to decide, okay, what is going to be the most relevant thing to share here in this situation in response to this question? We've got to sift through all of this stuff and decide what to share. So that's kind of hard. Introverts like to observe, process what's going on, evaluate their thoughts, construct their response, and then share. So they really need more time than is often given. And introverts often have outstanding ideas because of all this stuff going on in their head. There's a lot of good ideas in there, but they wait to be called on before sharing. Now, if that's the norm in your class, no problem. But sometimes as teachers, you might think, I want a more relaxed conversation. I want to just have a discussion where kids don't need to raise their hands, and that's fine. But if you relied on that and made that the norm, it might be putting the introverts at a disadvantage, because the extroverts are going to be real comfortable speaking up and sharing without being called on, but the introverts are more likely to wait to be called on, and so then they wouldn't share as much. But research shows that introverts' contributions tend to be appreciated more over time as people recognize that they really do have something worthwhile to say. So the more your class can get to know each other and bond and get more comfortable with each other, then you will see those introverts speak up a little bit more, and everyone, valuing what they have to say. And introverts really just don't see the need to add one more voice to an already loud group discussion. Extroverts kind of end up doing more of the talking, while introverts are more disengaged and overwhelmed. And here are just some common reasons that introverts don't speak up more. Again, it's not because necessarily they're shy. That might be one of the reasons, but it's also because they don't want to be wrong. They want to really get it right. They don't want to just talk for the sake of talking. They don't want to say something meaningless. They might be too busy listening and processing to talk. They don't have time to think up a response because it's moving so quickly. They might be afraid of getting tongue-tied once they start to speak, because again, they've got so many ideas. Sometimes it comes out a little awkward, and they might dislike being the center of attention with all eyes on them. Some of us don't mind that though. Also, introverts tend to get steamrolled during group work. So the more extroverted dominant students tend to take over in group work and then kind of expect others to follow. And then here's an introvert in the group who might have super valuable things to contribute, but they are just getting steamrolled. It's overwhelming and they just keep quiet and nobody's really reaching out and encouraging them to speak up so that they can contribute. But even if they seem quiet, even if they look like they want to crawl under a desk and be invisible, or if they seem really shy, all students want to be seen by their teachers. And when I say be seen, they want to be kind of known and appreciated for who they are on the inside. And so it's so important to have that connection with every student in your class. Really connect with them and let them know you see them and you see their quiet strength and you appreciate that about them. Introverts have a longer runway than extroverts before they are ready to take off and fly, and they need time to ease into new things. This isn't a bad thing. It's just a thing. They just have a longer runway. So let me give you an example. I like the example of swimming class. So if you can think back to like a swimming class for young kids. Now, some of the kids are fine just jumping right into the pool, and they might be introverts who have had a lot of swimming practice and they're confident about it. And other kids are on the side crying, and some of them might be extroverts. But for this analogy's sake, let's say that more of the kids on the side are introverts. Okay. In a typical swimming class that I've seen, the kids are expected to go into the pool, and then sometimes after a little while the teacher might have a fun little song and then dunk their heads under without them knowing, and the extroverted kids are like, oh, that was so funny, and the introverted kids are in tears because they weren't ready yet. They were still on their runway. The extroverts, no problem, they dunk under, it's fun, they're having a great time. The introverts are in tears and they don't want to go back to swimming lessons, and now the parents are in this predicament because they paid for swimming lessons and their kid is miserable. So a better way for introverts to get comfortable swimming, if this is an issue with them, is to allow them to maybe even the first lesson, just watch the lesson. If they're ready to get in, cool. But introverts want to sit back and know and understand the group dynamics. Check out the teacher and make sure they trust the teacher with their lives. They need that time to feel comfortable. So if a parent can afford to just let their kid kind of sit on the side and maybe put their feet in or just sit next to them out of the pool for the first 1 or 2 classes, that can make all the difference. And I never like kids to be forced underwater because it works for some kids and then it terrifies others. So I would advise against that, but just kind of let them go at their pace and let them have that yet longer runway. And then they will feel more of a sense of control and they are more likely to join in and take off when they're ready. Oh, and a good way to nudge them down the runway if they're taking their time, or this is just in general advice, validate, nudge. validate, nudge. Let me explain what I mean. Introverts really thrive off of validation. So something like, oh, it looks, are you a little nervous to get in the pool? Oh, that makes sense. I can see why. Let's sit on the side today. How are you feeling next class? How are you feeling? You feeling nervous still? Yeah. How about you and I sit together on the side of the pool and put our toes in, but you don't have to get in yet if you're still scared. Validating their fear, validating how they feel, letting them know it's okay to feel that way, and then just nudging them in a way that feels safe. And you can do this with everything in life with an introvert. Validate, nudge, validate, nudge. It's going to get them so much farther than just pushing them into the pool and hoping for the best. And now you've got weeks of trauma to try and undo and get them back re-engaged in the swimming class or the social event or whatever it might be. And another thing to remember is that there is nothing socially, emotionally, or developmentally wrong with being an introvert. Of course, introverts and extroverts might have a whole slew of issues that they've got to work on, but the introversion itself is not an actual problem. There is nothing wrong with that. And finally, they are worth it. Introverts are a treasure trove for deep thoughts within and across the content. They can be role models for your more quicker thinking students who might benefit from taking their time to think more deeply. And another illustration, the perks of being an introvert: they have a strong sense of self, a great imagination, a knack for listening, deep thinking skills, perfect excuse to stay home and watch Netflix, and you'd definitely be chill, stranded alone on a desert island for a while since you can entertain yourself with your thoughts. Okay, now I'm going to talk about, there are a lot of resources available to help introverts socialize more and thrive and find success in our extrovert-centric world. And that's great. Introverts can absolutely benefit from learning more about their trait and building up the skills that they may struggle with. So that's totally great. I'll just read to you some of these. You know, obviously, Susan Cain and all of her great work, we still live in an extrovert society. It didn't change that. This little old webinar is not going to change that. So introverts do kind of have to push themselves to thrive in our extrovert-centric society. So some of these look great, you know, how the thriving introvert, the introvert advantage. Here's Susan Cain's other book up here, Quiet, the awakened introvert, a lot of resources for introverts. And here are just a handful of articles. If you Google introverts, you will find so many articles to help introverts be more social. Some of these look great. Introverted, here's how to be more social. Cool. 7 strategies for introverts to ignite your social skills. Great. How to stop being shy and introverted. Unless you can change your DNA, you're not going to stop being introverted. How to go from introvert to extrovert. No, I'm not liking that title. But this last one's kind of cute. A letter to my teenage self. You're not weird. You're just an introvert. And now let's take a look at some of the titles available to extroverts to help them grow and stretch. There are, let's see, 0. There are 0 self-help books and articles for extroverts because they don't need any. This is an extrovert-centric society and they don't have any problems in terms of being extroverts. Could they benefit from maybe some more quiet reflection and contemplation and, you know, forming some deeper ideas rather than blurting things out quickly? Yeah, absolutely. But they don't really have to, because this society is set up for them to be successful exactly as there are. Now, actually, there was one kind of tongue-in-cheek article that was written in response to, this first one, Introverted, Here's How to Be More Social. That was on the Oprah website. And somebody wrote a response to that was titled something like Extroverted, Here's How to Be More Quiet and Reflective. But it was kind of written as a joke to show how there is nothing ever written for extroverts to learn to be a little more quiet like introverts. So it just kind of goes to show that it is definitely our world, American culture favors extroverts. All right, any questions so far? It's okay if you don't, but I want to open it up in case you do. Okay. Okay. Oh, is there a new poll link? Oh, I'm sorry. That's why that's why people didn't. No, there shouldn't have been a new link, but I don't know.
That's maybe. Okay. I think I figured it out. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. So moving on now to strategies for teachers. Another quote from Susan Cain, though, our most important institutions, our schools and our workplaces are designed mostly for extroverts, and for extroverts need for lots of stimulation. So these strategies that I'm going to share with you do not take away from extroverts. I promise you, they will benefit all of the students in your class, and they will give introverts a little bit more of a fighting chance to really engage in the classroom activities, when at other times they might just want to hide. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is not really a strategy as much as it is changing your mindset. And it's shifting from the idea of class participation being like the most important thing to student engagement. And you might already have this mindset, but let me just kind of go over it a little bit, what I mean by that. So class participation usually involves asking and answering questions and being involved in conversations and group discussions. That's cool. That's all good and fine. But if that is what you are mostly kind of relying on, then it's really stacking up the cards against introverts. Student engagement, on the other hand, I'm going to read you this definition that I like. It typically refers more to the degree of attention, curiosity, interest, optimism, and passion that students show when they are learning. That can extend to the level of motivation they have to learn and progress. And it is predicated on the belief that learning improves when students are inquisitive, interested, or inspired. And that learning tends to suffer when students are bored or otherwise disengaged. That mindset, I think, is much more inclusive of all students, regardless of personality trait. All students can be engaged there, whereas not all students might be engaged in a group discussion. The UDL component, multiple means of engagement, is, I think, really a great example here, because that benefits all students. So I'm not against, I don't think anybody is against group discussions and asking students questions and calling on them, even introverts. But some schools and classrooms have made participation like that the meat of learning, and they include it as a big percentage of the final class grade, which can be a little unfair to the introverts. So, and sometimes that kind of participation can turn into like meaningless noise and students just talking to talk. And then the introverts, once they've had a chance to craft their contribution, the discussion is over. And multiple means of engagement is a better practice, which can include quieter reflective activities, projects, etc. Allowing others to contribute is also just as important as contributing yourself. So it's good to teach that to your students, that it's great when you speak up, but it's also great when you quiet down so that others can have a chance to contribute. Those are all important parts of discussions. And introverts can benefit from learning to speak up, and extroverts can benefit from allowing others to share and backing down once in a while too. Again, I don't mean to paint extroverts in a light that does not apply to all extroverts. Some kids are extroverted and they don't speak up a lot in class. And that's just their style or whatever. So not all introverts are the ones blurting out and not letting the others talk. But certainly there are some dominant students that I'm sure you've seen like that. Let's see. Okay. Oh, one more thing though that I wanted to talk about, I think. Yes, it is also helpful in terms of engagement versus participation. It's helpful to teach and model reaching out to quieter students, like saying, hey, Christopher, I'd like to know what you think about that. Because like I said, Christopher might have, I just came up with Christopher, but Christopher might have an introvert, might have great ideas, but he's not going to speak up until he's called on. And so you can model reaching out to the quieter students and asking them, and then encouraging your students to do the same, your more extroverted students, to reach out and ask quieter students what they think. How healthy is that, right, for our society, if we are all honoring each other in that way? Now, I would still allow the introverted students to pass. They could just say, pass, or what would be better would be to teach them responses like, I need more time to think about that, or I'm not sure how I feel about that yet, or, I'm content to listen for now. Those are all very good assertive responses that they could offer that kind of gives them an out if they just have not come up with their response yet. But then after a few minutes, I would circle back and ask them, are you ready to share? Just in a kind of matter-of-fact way that would help them be comfortable, hopefully sharing. Okay, also, we often do icebreakers, and I have found that most people, extroverts included, kind of moan and groan at the idea of icebreakers, because sometimes they're just, I don't know, awkward for everyone. But they're not always even necessary if you think about it, because most extroverts have broken the ice as soon as they walked through the door, or they will as soon as they're out on the playground. And many introverts need time to see what the group dynamic is before transitioning into participation mode. Remember, they have that longer runway. So it is okay to let their ice melt slowly. You don't need to break it with a pickaxe. You can just let them melt their ice a little bit slowly. Some teachers don't require students, or at least if they've kind of picked up on some of their students are more introverted, they might not even require those students to speak up until the 3rd or even the 4th week of class after fall begins. I know that sounds like a lot, but again, it's giving them that longer runway. And some teachers have found that then they get really much better participation from these students when giving them that time, giving them kind of that grace. But if you'd like to do an icebreaker, and some really are fun, you can make it easy, fun, and no risk. The first one I'm going to tell you about is called conversation ball toss. I do this with with one of my classes that I teach at Cal State Fullerton, and I love it. It's really fun. This was back when we were in person, so I'll start this up in the fall again, but I take a big beach ball, or actually it's just a regular size beach ball. I take a beach ball, and there's different colors on the beach ball. And on each color, I write a different question. No risk question. No, they don't have to share anything deeply personal, right? Just fun surface stuff. So things like, what's your favorite smell? That one can get really interesting responses, because some people like the smell of asphalt or grass or, rose or whatever. What's your favorite smell? What's your favorite sound? What's your favorite place to go eat? What's your favorite animal? Do you have any pets? And so they catch the ball. And you can either say, like you would answer it first. You'd say, okay, my favorite smell is jasmine. Toss it to somebody else. They have to maybe say their name so that you can learn their names, perhaps. And then they can either pick a question to answer, that's really no risk. Or wherever their left thumb landed or whatever, that's the question they have to answer. I prefer just letting them pick because who cares? And then they toss it, they answer the question, then toss it to somebody else and so forth until everybody's had a turn. Students have to watch and decide, oh, did they have a turn? They've got to pay attention because you're not going to tell them who to toss it to next. They have to pay attention to who's had a turn. And then, so that's kind of a fun icebreaker that everyone can feel comfortable, and it's interesting to learn things about each other. Another one you've probably played in some way or another called Step Forward. There might be other names for it, but it's basically all the students line up and then you ask them questions like, take one step forward if you have a dog. And then everybody steps forward and then back. Okay, take a step forward if you have a cat. They step forward. You can kind of look around, see who else has a cat. Take a step forward if you like black licorice. You know, you can get kind of interesting, like things that not everybody likes, but oh, these two kids like black licorice. They can give each other a little wink and a nod, and maybe they'll become buddies. So that, again, there's no talking involved for that one. It's very no risk. It's just stepping forward, and you can kind of get to know other people's situations or whatever. And then structured games can be really fun for the first week of school. I see teachers do this a lot the last week of school or like for a field day, but some of these are really simple and all kids can enjoy these types of activities, like a potato sack race, a three-legged race, an egg on the spoon race, you know, when you try not to drop the egg, doing an obstacle course. Those are things that can help get kids more comfortable, and they're bonding activities. So I would rethink icebreakers and think more about bonding and making something that everybody can enjoy and not fear. Now let's talk about cold calling. And what I'm talking about is just when you call on kids cold and they don't know when they're going to be called on. Now, this is just par for the course in school. And I'm not saying you have to stop this altogether, but introverts do kind of get terrified at this. They tend to freeze up when they're called on unexpectedly. Again, not necessarily because they're shy or afraid, but because they haven't had time to think of a response. So another option is to let students know when you'll be calling on them and what about and when. So you don't necessarily have to do this like one-on-one with students. You could just tell all of the students, okay, tomorrow we're going to be discussing character intent of such and such character, or you can choose a character, and we're going to discuss this as a large group, and I want you to think about character intent. Obviously, you would have taught about character intent. They would be familiar with that. And then tomorrow, we're going to talk about it as a large group. Just giving them that heads up will give introverts some time to consider their thoughts ahead of time and be more ready to participate. And let's talk about think time. So research shows that most teachers wait about 1 second between asking a question and calling on a student. Now, part of this is because it's awkward. Other parts is because we have a lot to get through in one day, but you are giving only the high achieving extroverts a huge advantage, not an extrovert, because not all extroverts really know the content and are particularly high achieving. So you're only giving the high achieving extroverts an advantage if you're not waiting long enough. If you've taken my class about direct instruction reading, then you will know that we give students generally 4 seconds of think time to identify a word or a sound or something like that if it's a new one. And then we want them to go faster, and we give about 2 seconds think time. And then once they've mastered it, we give them 1 second think time. But that's because we're working on reading fluency. So we want them to go kind of fast, but we still count to 4 in our heads when it's a new sound or a new thing that they're learning. But another way to do this, if it's not reading instruction, but it's more of a discussion question, is to let your students know upfront that you'll be waiting 1 minute between asking a question and calling on someone. You might not do this all the time. Again, I know time is limited, but you could integrate this sometimes. It will feel like a long, awkward minute the first few times you do this, and you can just let students know, hey, it's going to feel a little awkward. We're just sitting there for a minute, but soon it will become the norm. They'll get used to it and they'll appreciate having that think time. This helps level the playing field of participation for introverts, as well as students who just need more time to process because perhaps they have a learning disability. And it encourages extroverted students to think more about their response, maybe even edit their response in their minds a couple of times before sharing and answering. And think, pair, share. I'm sure you've all done this. You're all familiar with it. This is a really popular one, and for good reason, not just for introverts. This is great for English learners, students with learning disabilities, introverted students, just everyone, students without anything, because it allows them time not only to reflect and develop their thoughts, but to ease into a discussion with a wider audience. First, you pose a question to the group and give students a set amount of time to gather their thoughts about the topic or question. Might be 2 minutes, might be 5 minutes, you decide. And you can allow them to write out their thoughts if they would like. You can kind of give them that option. You can just think in your mind, or you can write it out. And then students get into pairs, and then they share their thoughts and ideas with a partner. Then you can expand it to share to a small group or with a whole group, for the partners to then share in a small group or the whole group. So I love this one because it's such a great way to ease introverts or any students who might struggle in one way or another with group discussions, ease them into it, and really sets them up for success. Now, if you have the time to kind of think about how to pair students, it can be really helpful to pair introverted students with like moderate extroverts or ambiverts or more social introverts. A couple of introverts together can end up being really chatty and talkative, but if you pair them, like give them an extroverted buddy, but an extrovert that will allow them to share, not one that's going to steamroll them, that can be really helpful. And of course, we always want to diversify learning activities. So again, I'm going to refer to UDL, Universal Design for Learning. I'm not sure if I spelled that out earlier, but I think you all know about that. Multiple means of expression. And then I earlier talked about multiple means of engagement, but multiple means of expression means you can offer choices such as an oral presentation or a speech or quiz, essay, debate, blog, create a collage, create a video or a vlog, or teach a topic to others. I'm not recommending you offer all those choices on every single assignment, or even you need to offer choices period on every single assignment. Sometimes it's just going to be a quiz. That's fine. But if the more choice you can integrate, the more helpful that it is for all students. This way, if you were offering, let's say you can take a quiz, or you can write an essay, or you can create a video, that's going to cover all your bases. And that way students can show what they know in a way that is most natural to them, and then they're going to do better on it. Versus if you're requiring all students to give a speech, then not only are they having to stretch themselves to give the speech, but they also have to have mastered the content. So it's like double things that you're asking of them. Sometimes that's what you want, and that's your goal, and that's fine. But you want to just give them some choice so they can be successful at other times. It can also be helpful to follow up group work with a quiet solo activity, or vice versa. Start with a quiet activity and follow that up with group work. That way you're hitting everybody's needs, whether they're extroverts or introverts. It can be helpful to offer the choice to work in a group with a partner or by yourself. I do this a lot in my class. At the end of class, I give them I'll say, okay, I want you to write a lesson plan. and here are the instructions, and you can do this in a small group or with just a partner or by yourself. And I end up getting all different configurations. I'll get some from students that just preferred to work by themselves, and then I'll get, a group of 3 or 4 students that work together turning in one paper, and that's fine. That way they can work in a way that's best for them. And you can give your students that choice too. You can also offer choices in topics. So if you are going to require a students to do an oral presentation, maybe give them some choice in topics that are related to your overarching theme so that they can pick the one they feel most confident talking about. And you can try an option like Poll Everywhere, or there's other options out there that allow students to respond live via text or on the website, and they might be more comfortable. They might speak up or participate more that way as well. And then it's really great and so empowering, really teaching them a life skill to encourage students to pay attention to how they learn best. And then when you do offer choices, encourage them to choose activities that align with how they learn best. So when students can learn their learning style, then they can learn better. There are online tests that you can provide, or you can just have them test it out. So you can say, okay, I want everyone, we're all going to do a quiz this time. And the next time we're all going to do a debate or whatever. Next time I'm going to ask you to do a blog. And then I'm going to survey you on which one helped you learn the best. So you can kind of set up an experiment for students to learn more about their learning style in that way. And just an example of learning style. So here's an introvert talking, not much being said, how was your day? Not bad, that's good, yep. And then she goes home and writes in her diary, and it's just very, very lengthy. Today I had a moment of intense clarity. I had the realization that the perceived flaws in my relationship, and just goes on and on. Another idea, this one is called Stick It. And this is where, let's say you're teaching about, I don't know, World War II or something, and maybe you're going to post pictures of the Great Depression or something like that around the room. Anything, just whatever topic you're teaching, you would post pictures or quotes or stories around the room. Then you would give them a prompt. Okay, give me your first thoughts about each photograph that you look at, and they would write their thoughts or ask a question about the photograph on a sticky note and attach it to the photo or the poster or whatever it is. Then you would have students get into small groups and give them a photo, say, okay, this one's your photograph, and then they would discuss each sticky note. So that way they've had a chance to participate in 2 different ways, writing it down and in a small group discussion. This gives them time to think about each photograph or quote that you have posted, and then they'll feel more ready. They've written something down about each one, and then they'll feel more ready to discuss it. Similar to Stick It is brain writing, but instead you would pose one question to the group, and everyone would write their ideas on a Post-it note and stick it on the board, let's say, or on the table. And then you can either discuss all of them as a whole group, randomly choose a few to discuss, or divide the students into groups and then pass out the notes to discuss. So that's another way of kind of framing a group discussion, but giving students time to think a little deeper about it first. I love this one. This is called talking chips. So this is for use in small group discussions to encourage equitable sharing. So what you would do is each student would get, let's say you put students in a small group and you say, okay, here's the prompt that you guys are going to talk about. Each student gets a set number of tokens. They could be little checkers pieces or pennies or just whatever you have on hand. And let's say each student gets 4. They can share 4 contributions. After a student has shared one contribution, is shared once, they put one of their tokens into a communal jar. They can keep sharing until they've spent all their tokens. If they've spent all their tokens, they do not share again until everyone has used up their tokens. So, and then if time permits, you can redistribute, one student can redistribute the tokens and the discussion can continue, or you can keep talking about the tokens. I don't know, whichever way you would want to do it. But I love this one because, again, it levels the playing field. Now it's encouraging introverts to speak up a little bit, but they're not going to have the extroverted, more talkative students talking over them constantly. They will have to give them a turn. And cooperative grouping. So we all love cooperative groups, I think. And here are some just other roles that you may not have thought about that would allow introverts to contribute in meaningful ways. I think typically the introverts are hoping to be note taker or researcher. But some of these are common, some of these are uncommon. So like speaker, if you're going to have them share with the group, you might have one speaker, and that would be a great one for an extrovert. You could give it to an introvert, but they would probably spend the whole time in group being terrified about when it's their turn to be the speaker, and they might not learn as much. So I recommend either letting students choose their role, if that works out, or you choose the role for them and try to match it with their strengths. If you pull it out of a hat, only do that if your goal is to terrify the introverts. So speaker, organizer might be somebody who's going to organize how they're going to do the project or something like that. Facilitator. I love this one. The facilitator would be the person in charge of making sure everyone has had a chance to share ideas. So they would be kind of watching out for kids who haven't spoken up, that are a little bit quieter, and then you would train them how to reach out to quieter students and ask for their input, like I mentioned earlier. So that could be their role, and an introvert might be really good at that role too. That could go for either. Note taker, researcher, outreach coordinator. I love this one too. Let me explain the outreach coordinator. That would be if you're working on a project, if small groups are working on a project that's not competitive, but they could help each other out. Groups might help each other out. That's what the outreach coordinator is. The outreach coordinator would need to leave their own group after they've gotten started on their project, leave their own group and go see what other groups are doing. Share their ideas from their group and get some ideas from the other groups, bring them back so everybody's project is going to be stronger with more ideas. Now that outreach coordinator, probably an extrovert, would love that job. You might give it to an introvert because it would be somewhat, like structured, but it's up to you if you want to kind of push an introvert to stretch a little bit, or that's perfect for an extrovert. Observer might be if you're doing some research and a couple of students need to go like observe how many times kids get drinks out of the water fountain at recess for whatever reason. I don't know. Then they would be the observer. They would go and be tallying the number of times that kids get a drink out of the fountain. So that would be observer. Devil's advocate, if you're going to do any kind of debate, and then question developer. This person would develop questions for a group discussion. That could be introvert or extrovert friendly. And peer tutoring. Peer tutoring is such a great strategy for a lot of different reasons. But it can really, introverts can actually make excellent peer tutors. So sometimes you might do peer tutoring with your whole class, but other times you might just have a student that needs a little extra help. And so you assign a peer tutor to work with them. That's the kind I'm talking about right now. And introverts can make really good peer tutors given the opportunity. You might not think so because they aren't as social, but if you choose, they might not volunteer, they might not even be comfortable with it right away, but when they're paired with someone who needs help and will accept it from them, and the content is something that they are good at and they enjoy, they can really shine at the job of peer tutor. And then another strategy is think it out, talk it out. This one's so simple. It's just that you provide a discussion prompt or a problem to solve. This could be a math problem if you're going to kind of have kids work on it in groups, and give them 5 minutes of quiet time to think it out on paper before they talk it out in groups. You can use this for any subject whatsoever. And participation preferences. So it can kind of help also if you have a student who's really quiet and you really do want them to share their ideas, but they always freeze up or never speak up. You can have a one-on-one conversation with students like this and just ask them about their preferences. Say, would you prefer to be called on at the beginning of a discussion, in the middle, or towards the end? Some kids want to be called on right at the start so they can get it over with. And then they can just relax and listen to the rest of the discussion. Other students might prefer to do it towards the end so that they have time to gather their thoughts. So you could reach out to students and, if you conference with students, you could just kind of ask what their preference is. Some might prefer like early morning or before lunch or after lunch. You might say, how many times would you like to be called on? I know that's a lot to keep track of, but if you do have a smaller class, that might work out. In general, you can wait for students to raise their hand to participate, but let them know maybe, well, if you haven't raised your hand by first recess, I'm probably going to call on you after recess. So then they know what to expect. And you'll keep this private between you and the student, just to kind of honor their privacy. And then here are a few ways to give introverted students breaks, because introverted students realize they are on for hours during the school day of group projects, class discussions, lunchtime noise, loud whistles, and no alone time. So you might ask your introverted students to take a note to the office or to another teacher, send maybe 2 introverted students together. That way, they can kind of just enjoy a little bit of quiet time together outside. And then it will encourage, they'll have to have a brief interaction with another teacher, which helps them stretch, but also gives them a break from all the hustle and bustle of the classroom. And if possible, allow some breathing room. Schedule group work and discussions for earlier in the day, and then allow some choices toward the end of the day when introverts are really starting to run out of fuel. So high energy social students might like to do partner work at the end of the day, while introverted students might appreciate the option to complete work alone and in a quiet space. If you are lucky enough to have flexible seating, or you're able to create some kind of quiet, semi-secluded areas in your classroom, that can be really helpful. Obviously, you still want to keep students safe and have them in your visual proximity, but if you can carve out some little areas, like if you have a student who likes to hide out under a desk, maybe you decide to stop fighting it and allow it if it's safe, because maybe they're going to work better. If they're going to do their work under the desk and they're still engaged in working, I don't know, I'd personally be fine with that. Or, kind of behind a bookcase. I don't mean like up against the wall in an unsafe situation, but if you have your bookcases kind of set to where there could be a little quiet space for them to do their work, that can be really helpful. Here is just another illustration that I like, how grumpy you are and how long it's been since you've had alone time. This is for introverts, and you get more grumpy the longer it's been. So keep that in mind. Again, with the end of the school day, that's when, those nooks and crannies or those quiet options for completing work can be really helpful. Of course, social platforms really offer a great opportunity for introverts to be social in a way that doesn't feel so scary for them. And they sometimes really open up in a social platform much more than they would in person. So you could have introverts maybe develop questions for, if you have a class social media type of a platform, they could develop questions for social media chat. They might enjoy preparing, recording, and editing a podcast, because that can be a solitary experience, but where they are talking and they're more comfortable talking. And here's just a few teaching hacks to make class less terrifying for your introverted students. If possible, and this was hard, I think, especially on Zoom for introverted students, when this teacher would say, okay, you're going to get in breakout rooms with a partner right now, and I'm going to put you in, and they don't know who they're going to be with. That can be so scary because they don't know who they're going to be assigned to, and the unknown is kind of scary. So if you can assign partners ahead of time somehow so that students know who they'll be working with, that can alleviate so much anxiety. And you probably already do this, but if you're able to keep partners the same for multiple activities, that can be really helpful too, so that students can be comfortable or can become comfortable with their partner. And this helps introverts make new friends this way, since they tend to build friendships more slowly and over repeated interactions. When possible, let students know ahead of time when they'll be asked to speak and on what topic. And if you want students to speak on their feet, which is something we all have to learn, try to choose a topic they enjoy and know a lot about. Keep in mind, introverted students are out of their comfort zone for most of the school day, so it's okay to make things nice for them sometimes too. And you can create a community that embraces introverts. Teach active listening. Require partners to take turns speaking and practice active listening. Explain that listening is as vital to participation as speaking. When introverts are with an active listener, they open up more and they feel less overwhelmed. This is a great way to help extroverted students stretch and learn to create and hold space for others. Also, talk up your quiet students to others. Do it discreetly and subtly so as not to embarrass them, but you can talk about how much you appreciate their thoughtful ways, how they take their time to consider all sides, and add really interesting perspectives to group discussions while listening well to others. You can show pride and respect for the way that they are. Many introverts feel shame about their introversion, which can lead to anxiety and more trouble opening up. So the more they feel validated, the more they will stretch themselves and feel empowered. But you can still require introverts to stretch. Don't throw them into the pool, so to speak, or force them to do things that cause panic, but you don't have to overdo it with special treatment either. Introverts need to learn to articulate their thoughts in front of a group and learn from others' perspectives in a group setting. Those are just life skills for everyone. They also need to learn to speak up for themselves, even when it's hard, advocate for themselves and others, and communicate their educational and emotional needs. You can create activities and challenges that foster this kind of growth, such as, I'm going to share 2 ideas here, a social scavenger hunt. You can create a scavenger hunt that requires students to ask people questions, such as other students or teachers, office staff, the custodian, etc. I would send students out in pairs because for safety, for one thing, but also it's a little more comfortable in pairs. And they might have a poll about people's opinions or experiences. Maybe they need to ask for information, ask for directions, ask for signatures for a petition. But the rules are they must look the person in the eye, or at least face them and keep their head up, and speak loud enough for the person to hear them. And their buddies, they would have to kind of keep themselves accountable for that. And they would need to do something such as they ask every other person. Since there would be a pair of them, we wouldn't want just one person getting all the experience. So they would switch off asking the questions. And then another idea would be to conduct an interview. So students can conduct interviews around campus with school staff, and they would create a set of questions based on a topic. And you might also coach students on how to probe further into an answer, like, why do you feel that way? Or how did you come to have that opinion? Topic ideas would be, what is it like to do your job? Are you more of an introvert or extrovert? There's actually a whole set of lesson plans to teach students about introverts and extroverts. I'm going to share that with you. How do you define success? What do you like and dislike about our state? That one could be really interesting. And what's the last book you read? and then a list of questions about asking more about the book. So you could really apply that to so many different subject areas. Let's see. Okay, I am going to share now this quiet, friendly comment guide. I love this so much. So this is for progress reports, notes home, you name it. Let me pull that up and share it. So in the PowerPoint, and by the way, I will share the PowerPoint in the chat because I forgot to do that. But let me pull up the quiet, friendly comment guide. Here it is. So again, this can be things you write on report cards, progress reports, just notes home. But how do, so let's see, knowing your strengths and leading from the inside out, you might say something like, Rosa forms meaningful relationships and is a sought after partner in class. Abraham is very reflective and self-aware learner. Other things, you know, Carrie can often be found with a book during recess, using this time to recharge for afternoon classroom activities. Instead of coming down on Carrie for not being more social at recess, you can reframe it and recognize Carrie's actually practicing self-care and recharging so that they can participate better in the afternoon. So I love this. I will share this in the chat. And let's see, let me just, okay, that was about it for my PowerPoint. And so let me take a moment to post all of that in the chat for you, so I don't want to forget. And I'm going to ask you guys to take a survey also in just a moment. But while I'm doing this, go ahead and think if you have any questions. You are welcome to to ask any questions now. And I'm going to be putting things in the chat that you can download, like my PowerPoint and the thing I just shared, the comment guide. And then I told you there are lesson plans for teaching about introverts and extroverts. I'm going to put that in there too. It's called the Quiet Rev Teacher's Guide. And I think that's about it. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording. And if you would like to ask any questions, go ahead. And I will share the survey link as well. And then I'll talk about my next webinar.